WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and WNST.net. This is the point in the program where I want to give some love to Dr. Steve Elliott and the Elliott Family Chiropractic Life Center. You hear me talking about it all the time. Right now, my back hurts a little bit. I got to get out and see Dr. Steve here this week. Something about the Cheap Trick and Valentine's Day weekend and, carrying all these ad agencies on my back make my back hurt. So I'm actually literally sitting on ice right now as we're going to do this segment. And it's a good thing that I'm sitting on ice to cool me down, Luke Jones, because we can talk Ravens and Tony Jefferson and James Hurst getting popped and what's going on with the Combine and who's drafting whom and how Joe Burrow is going to light up the Bengals. We can talk about the Terps being in the top 10 and how awesome it is and they're going to the tournament and let's all make our plans to go to Atlanta the first weekend of April like we did in Tampa 20 years ago. But it's baseball season and, you're Mr. Baseball. My last name's Aparicio. I've been banned. This will be my 15th season of being banned from going to Oriole Park at Camden Yards and doing my job. They're down in Sarasota right now, but, I just want to give you some oxygen. I'm sitting on ice. I'm cooling down. You and I have not talked about this. I don't even know. We slept together for 5 nights, did everything, ate, did radio. I don't know that we talked a lot of baseball. Like, you and I have not gotten into that third beer, what the hell are they doing conversation. And I'm going to get to that with Marty Conway this week, Alan McCallum. I think even people I talked to a month ago when, Cora's getting thrown out. This is a whole different thing now that we're into spring training and players are talking and Bellinger's going to say what he's going to say and Trevor Bauer's going to say what he's going to say and Adam Jones is going to be over in Japan holding his nose on the internet. This is really a disgraceful thing, and I've been covering disgraces of baseball, including the ownership here, Pete Rose, canceling the World Series, drug, issues and steroids, and all of the shame of baseball. This for me is starting to become the biggest one that I can remember, even more than canceling the World Series, because that was over money. This is over integrity, man. This is an ugly, ugly time for baseball, and the Orioles, Baltimore, everyone should be waking up to whatever the aftermath of life after Astrogate is going to be, man. Yeah,
it's definitely, baseball's had some ugly times. There's no question about it.
Jackie Robinson, let's get it.
Yeah, the Black Sox scandal. There have been scandals. It's not as though this is something that is terribly unique, but at the same time, you just said it. Whenever you talk about integrity of a game, integrity of competition, you have a really big problem. And, that's not to make light of any off-field issues. Certainly for me, what comes to mind big time, seeing Rob Manfred, the way that he's just completely botched this thing.
It's disgraceful. He should be fired tomorrow morning for this, right? If they had strong leadership there to say,
he's not going anywhere.
These MFers cheated all of us, and you're absolving them, and now we're going to go play baseball? Really? I don't know. This is sorry for the ladies listening. This is a man's game, and how this will be settled, and this is the beginning. No offense to what the policing issues we have here in Baltimore, which are clearly life and death situations. The policing of Major League Baseball is going to become a very, very big issue.
Well, it's been a big issue. It's just going to draw more attention to it. It's something that's been a problem. But, what I was about to say about Rob Manfred, for me, it's very reminiscent how he's mishandled this, and mishandle it is probably the nicest way I could describe it. It's very reminiscent of Roger Goodell with the Ray Rice thing and domestic violence. I can't take credit for this. Michael McCann, the great sports legal expert for Sports Illustrated, I saw he tweeted, I believe it was over the weekend, basically said, Manfred's not going anywhere. First of all, we know he works for the owners in the same way that Roger Goodell works for the owners in the NFL when we were talking about that 5-6 years ago specifically. But revenues, even if you want to talk about attendance, revenue is still good in Major League Baseball. His contract is, he's under contract for several more years, and they have the CBA coming up in a couple of years that they're going to have to do work on. So as much as I'm in agreement with you that I think you'd love, if you're a baseball fan and really concerned, outraged, disillusioned, disenchanted, however you want to describe it, with how this has been handled. And that's really my frustration, my disdain has shifted. Not that it's not there anymore, but the brunt of it has shifted to how Rob Manfred has completely botched this thing, how he granted immunity in a situation where the purpose for it was he was worried about grievances with the union.
Where's the long-term strategy, dude? Did you think about how this was going to play out when the video of Altuve grabbing his jersey, how that looks for everyone who plays this game and tries to win without a needle in their arm, without banging on trash cans, literally putting their blood and their sweat and their tears into winning. And you're around these guys. I'm not anymore, but I remember. I remember the fire of Rick Sutcliffe and Cal Ripken and all of that. And I can't imagine that. I mean, I said a couple weeks ago we're not till dusk yet. Dawn yet on where this story is. I still feel like it's 2 a.m. There's so much every day that's going to come out of this as players play and players talk and coaches talk and people in the game talk and how many 13 teams came to Major League Baseball and said they're cheating and nobody did anything about it for 3 years.
Yeah, that's what's ridiculous about this, because it's something that had been talked about behind closed doors, and there had been rumors, and some of it probably hearsay, but some of it legitimate. And that's where you look at this. And typically when you look at immunity, and this is, Rob Manfred gave players immunity because he wanted them to talk. He wanted to find out more information. It made any investigation way easier if you're going to do that. And I'm not saying it's right, to be clear, but that's I assume, the motivation behind this. But when the purpose of that, what really was going to be the purpose? Just to say, okay, well, here's what happened, and we're going to make sure it doesn't happen again. Well,
if you get to the truth, and the truth is hideous, and you don't punish anybody, then what's the point?
But the problem is, he shouldn't have gone into it with the idea of granting immunity in the first place, because and that really speaks to what his tenure has been. And look, I wasn't a Bud Selig fan whatsoever either. I think it's a joke he's in the Baseball Hall of Fame when you consider his role in the PED era and owner's role in that. And you can demonize the players as much as you want, but I think you just look at how he's tried to handle things. It has been everything has been path of least resistance and let this go away. And that's how this was handled. You grant players immunity, and then you find out about, and this is where the Wall Street Journal article that came out last week talking about Codebreaker and the, quote, dark arts made it very clear that this was not remotely solely a player-driven, Alex Cora-driven operation, yet the report that Rob Manfred put out, Major League Baseball put out, painted the picture that this was a player-driven thing.
Fake news. By the way, when you grant immunity before you start an investigation, you already say, well, what you did couldn't have been all that bad because we're going to let you get away with it. Now, you just tell me the truth, and whatever your role is, if you were the trigger man, we're going to let you get away with it. We're giving you immunity before we even start. That's outrageous, man. It really is.
And I don't know if it's even that we say it's not that bad, but typically when you talk about prosecutors granting immunity, it's with the idea that you're going after someone much higher on the food chain, right? You think of, on a very simplistic
we all saw
level,
The Godfather, yes.
Drug dealers they're going to rat on the suppliers, right? When you think of any movies you've watched or TV shows you've watched. But in this case, they were playing defense. It was out of worry that the players' union was going to file grievances over this, and you knew they would have. But make them do that then. Put them on the defensive. Cast them in the negative light from the standpoint of saying, well, the union, they're going to have to defend those Astros players, but guess what? They also defend all the other players around baseball that were impacted. it's really interesting, Nestor. You and I did have a conversation about this 3 weeks ago, something like that. Probably right after the Ravens playoff loss, we got into this a little bit. But
at that point, it felt like, okay, it's over with. Let's talk about it. Oh my God! Right?
Although I wasn't sure about that, but I do think the parallels that you see with this and what happened in prior to PED testing is what it wasn't. It's not until you get to a point where the players' union wants to get involved and really wants to say, okay, this is a major problem, that anything meaningful is going to be put in place to prevent this. And they're talking about it already. I know Rob Manfred talked on Sunday down in Florida, talking about the fact that he anticipates the use of video in real time during baseball games is going to be severely limited, which is good. But it's the same thing that for years the powers that be in Major League Baseball were so terrified to do anything about steroids and PEDs. Why? Because they were afraid of the players' union, right? I mean, and that's where they kind of just turned they closed their eyes and plugged their ears and said nothing to see here. And meanwhile, they were profiting off of it. So, some of the parallels with that and now what we're seeing now with how this has been handled, mishandled, botched, however you want to describe it, it's very reminiscent in that way. But it's so strange to me how you can send, if you're Rob Manfred, you send Jeff Luhnow a letter talking about Codebreaker and the dark arts and what they had uncovered there, and yet then you decide to not put anything about that in your actual report that you release to the public about this. And you paint it in a way that the players are the ones at fault, yet they're the ones you granted immunity to. So, I mean, it's just, this whole thing has just been a cluster. And like I said, in that way, it really reminds me a lot of how the NFL handled the Ray Rice case and some other domestic violence-related cases. And, it's just a reminder that while these are a lot of rich individuals who, might be owners and look, Rob Manfred works for the owners. Let's remind everyone of that. As much as we're going to single him out, he works for the 30 owners in the same way that Roger Goodell works for the 32 owners
and they should be upset of how sloppy this was handled.
Right. But these are billionaires, but that doesn't mean they're always very smart when it comes to more sensitive issues, like domestic violence in the NFL, or in this case, talking about integrity of the game. And to see comments that Jim Crane has made and talked about, I mean, it's just it's laughable. I mean, it really is.
Well, and then Correa saying Altuve was the only one not cheating. Well, then what the hell does that say about the rest of you?
Well, and I'll say this, and look, I have no idea if what Carlos Correa, whether what he's saying is truthful. I'll say this: he sounds like he has more honesty in what he says than some of the more generic.
Than his owner does.
Well, and some of his teammates who've kind of apologized, but won't really. It's kind of the whole apologize, but I'm not here to talk about the past thing. You think back to years ago with Mark McGwire, but. Look, I don't know. I don't know if Jose Altuve individually cheated or not. I don't know if he wore buzzers or not. I don't know if the other players wore buzzers or not. But there's certainly enough evidence.
Well, how do you feel about the Altuve thing? Let's just go one by one to Luke Jones, baseball reporter, fan, in the locker room, around the team, knowing what was said about it, watching the video over and over again. It's the most damning thing I think I've ever seen. I don't...
What, the jersey thing? Oh, no, the damning thing is that you can go back and watch all these videos and you can hear the banging. That's the most damning thing. I mean, the buzzer thing is still... until someone has complete evidence of that, I still am willing to say that I don't know if that's necessarily the truth. The banging on the trash can things has been proven at this point. You can hear it. You can look at the video of Danny Farquhar hearing it and stepping off, and that got the Astros players all spooked that someone had figured them out. That's the most damning part. I mean, Altuve, look, am I going to single him out any more than any other player on the Astros roster? I don't know. I know that the not pulling off his jersey thing was weird, but I've also seen players in different sports have lots of weird intricacies. Adrian Beltre would flip out if anyone touched his head, for example. So So I don't know. I'm willing to give some small acknowledgement that I don't know if buzzers necessarily happen, but I do know what did happen that has been proven and has been admitted to with the trash cans and now with Code Breaker and the dark arts and what their player personnel people were doing and the monitor behind the dugout. We know those parts. The buzzers, look, I'm not going to say it didn't happen because when you open Pandora's box and you go down the rabbit hole of cheating, everything's in doubt. Everything's in question. But
once you start robbing banks and it feels easy, you move on to casinos. You know what I mean? Like literally,
sure.
That's what the Altuve thing says to me. That if we could do this, we could do that, and if we do that, there's not even any banging involved. You just buzz me when it's fastball.
Sure. And like I said, if more reporting comes out, and look, that's kind of where I am with this whole thing. You're kind of just waiting to hear what's next, right? I mean, you're just waiting to hear what's next, and that's where you can almost transition to Mike Elias and Sig Mejdal and company.
Oh, could you? Let me read some ads, and then we'll get to that. Because believe me, that's the next part of the equation for us here locally. I think. I think that's the next shoe to drop. Code Breaker.
Yeah, I mean, and just wondering. I mean, and there might not be another shoe to drop, but when.
John Angelos is hoping there is, and so is Mike Elias and Sig Mejdal, right?
But you start going down the rabbit hole, and everything that was that touched the Astros at all comes under question. It doesn't mean it's all dirty, but it all has that perception, and that's where there is uneasiness, and that's where you do look at that and just look. I don't know for sure if they did wear buzzers, and I know there's been talk and rumors of that, but. To this point, and there's been a lot of really good reporting done to this point with the Athletic and the Wall Street Journal and the big reporters that the Wall Street Journal got the letter that Rob Manfred sent to Jeff Luhnow, and Rob Manfred even acknowledged that over the weekend. But at the same time, until there's something more specific, until it's definitive that they use buzzers, okay, fine. But again, everything that organization touches or anyone that has touched that organization in recent years, there's going to be doubt. There's going to be question. There's going to be, at best, gray area. And that's just something that anyone with ties to the Astros is going to have to own. And, again, as we're waiting and wondering, and while we're discussing the possibility of beanballs and retaliation, which, by the way, I still don't condone any of that either, but there's going to be that, and on a more global level, and this is where I do remind everyone that the Red Sox under investigation, the Yankees, there have been some, Carlos Beltran went to the Yankees and was part of that organization, so you wonder about that. I suspect the Astros are not alone in this. The Astros and the Red Sox are not alone in this, and that's where it is interesting to see some of the reaction around baseball, but at the same time, on a global level, you have a major integrity problem, and that's where it comes back full circle to the commissioner and just how this thing has been so mismanaged.
Here's Luke Jones. You can find him, Baltimore Luke, out on Twitter. He will be banging around with the Orioles. Yes, they still play Major League Baseball around here. Want to give a shout-out to all of our newest sponsors in the 2020. These are the folks that support us with Baltimore Positive and WNST.net. Make sure you give them some love. I'm wearing my Raskin Global shirt here. I know you see I got a color in the Raskin part because that part's not dark. I see the globe though, but I've got my investments over here, my Raskin Global, a little lip balm over here, empowering people to choose their financial future for over 33 years. Leonard Raskin has an event on Thursday night. You can learn more about it at RaskinGlobal.com. They're also out on Facebook as well. You got money, needs to be invested wisely. You need people you can trust. And experts, that's what Raskin Global is all about. Liberty Pure Solutions, they're all about fresh water, acleanwater.com, 1-800-CLEAN-WATER, residential plumbing, boiler services, water analysis. I always wonder how clean my water is. This year's the year that Doug Workman and the folks over at Liberty Pure are going to teach me about water treatment and delivery. They're delivering my water here, free water analysis for you, and they treat the water at the Ravens training facility too. Trust Doug and the folks at Liberty Pure. Find them at 1-800-CLEAN-WATER. Also, Full Circle Tire and Auto. Tires, and more tires. 38 brands in stock. Same-day service in the guaranteed lowest price in Harford County. Find Dave and our friends up at Full Circle Tire and Auto. They're also out on Facebook. I'll be wearing the black shirt around here before the week is over as well. And winter is almost over. We're going to be back at State Fair later in the week, back at Fadley's at Lexington Market. And, of course, Fadley's now coming to Catonsville. If you haven't heard, there's big news there. This time next year, you'll be able to get your crab cakes from Fadley's out in Catonsville, where the family's from. They're not leaving Lexington Market. Lexington Market's being rebuilt right now, bigger and better than ever. I saw it with my own eyes last week. I'll see it again next week. Make sure you're checking out Mary Washington, Mary Miller, TJ Smith, Taru Vignaraja, Brandon Scott, Jack Young, all of them out right now at Baltimore Positive as we get ready for April 28th. I'm going to be ramping up. You put on WNST, you're going to hear me opining about all the important stuff going on around here. Big thanks to all of our sponsors. One last shout-out to our friends at King Discount Liquors, Lottery Beer, Booze, and the best prices in Baltimore. Get to Rosedale and give the King a ring. Last I checked, the Orioles were banning my King Discount Liquors commercials. Look, it's baseball season, right? And we're going to do the Combine, and we're going to do, March 10th and 12th, and we're going to get into free agency, and we're going to talk Ravens. There's going to be a draft in April. Terps are playing well. You and I have talked about that. We'll talk about that more this week around here. But for the Orioles and where they sit in all of this and where Elias and Meidel are, because that's what concerns me as well. I mean, my biggest concern, as you know, isn't whether they're going to lose 99 games this year or 102, because they're going to lose a lot of games this year and they're not going to be relevant this year. I'm more concerned about the long-term trajectory of the sport, the team, the franchise, the city, my community, the stadium lease. And these are the things I'm going to be focused on much more so than, how much money is Trey Mancini going to get in arbitration when all is said and done,
Yeah, and I mean, that's where you do look at this entire Astros scandal and you ask the question, what did Mike Elias know? What did Stig Meidel know? What potential involvement, if any, did they have? And that's where, to this point, nothing has been linked to them directly.
But that's not going to stop people like you and me from treating them like they're guilty or involved.
I'm not going to treat them like they're guilty. Let's be clear about this. Not everyone in the Houston Astros organization is completely dirty. Now, the organization, their actions are dirty, but I'm not going to...
But these guys got jobs off of them winning, right? Like, if they were a second-place team, these guys wouldn't be geniuses, and they wouldn't be paid at the top of school the way John had to go and pay them more than anybody else would, which is the reason they're here. And the notion that they were geniuses, and I was going to run over to Barnes & Noble and hear what, Ben Reiter had to say with Sig Meidel, and that he's a genius, that they know something others can't know, to the point where we're reading books. I'm urinating all over that in my mind right now, and I'm waiting for the rest of it to follow. And you know why that is, Luke? Because I'm 51 years old and I'm not an idiot. You know what I mean? Like that's how I view it. That this isn't sort of circumstantial evidence. This is an organization that's been taken down, and the reason they got their job here was because of the good things that happened there that allegedly at that time were on the up and up. And it's very, very clear that operation was not on the up and up. So at the very least, I'm very, very skeptical of the Elias Meidel magic touch that they have. So
all right, and
that's fair.
Look, I'm not saying that you're wrong in feeling that way. I'm just saying I'm not going to just say they're guilty and they're cheaters too. Skepticism is certain.
And they got their stripes from cheating. How about that?
And this is part of what ticks me off about the fact that this happened is that analytics and technology and research-based baseball practices
Dusty Baker got a job last week.
That have become the norm are demonized because of what happened here. Look, you can still go back and read Astro Ball, and there was still plenty of brilliant stuff in there, and that has nothing to do with sign stealing. Player development practices that have been put in place, not just in Houston, but elsewhere, has nothing to do with sign stealing. Things that have, and really this is where I think it's interesting, if you're looking for motivations, beyond just saying, well, I don't have much, as an organization, we don't have much integrity, and we're going to just try to get an edge, and we're going to cheat, and we're going to blur the line between gamesmanship and blatant cheating. But if you do look at the Astros, and this has kind of been the case with modern baseball development collectively, where have more of the advances come? On the pitching side. I think that's clear with spin rate and these high-speed cameras, and they can look at grip, they can look at release point, they can measure all these different things, and it can drive then development, it can drive instruction. So where has there been less advancement? On the offensive side. So if you're the Astros, well, you steal signs then, right? I mean, but to bring it back to what I was trying to say, though, and it's not just defending Mike Elias and Sig Mejdal, because, look, they work for them, they have to wear it, and people are going to be skeptical of them, and every time there's a report, Orioles fans are going to read it to see if either one of their names show up, and if they do, then all hell breaks loose here in Baltimore in that regard. But what makes me mad about this just happening in general is that analytics and technology and new ways of thinking about the game and new practices and new ways to develop players and modeling and algorithms and all those different things now come under under a negative light and now are demonized. And you just said it. I mean, people will discredit the many brilliant things that the Astros did do. And guess what? That's fair. That's fair to feel that way, and that's fair to judge in that way. And yeah, their World Series is tainted. Now, that said, that I don't think the Houston Astros got to where they got simply by stealing signs. You don't take a bunch of 240 hitters and they're going to be in the same way that
I strongly disagree with that assessment, though. I think, now that I'm looking back on this, if you know what's coming and you know what's coming some of the time, then you can really become a great major league player when you have the skill set they have.
But there's a lot of evidence with how they played on the road. I mean, I look, it's tainted. But I don't think terrible players
I hate cheaters, dude. I hate liars, and I hate cheaters. It's what I've stood for 30 years.
Like I am saying cheating's okay. I'm just saying that there's plenty there to prove that other things they were due that were on the up and up were good. And what makes me mad about this is that when you do cheat, all that goes out the window. And that's what ticks me off more so just as a baseball fan in all these advancements that have been made. Now, everyone just saying, well, let's cheat. Let's get rid of technology. No more video. Let's go back to idolizing win-loss record and RBIs and things of that nature.
Can I go back to keeping a scorecard with a pencil? If I can do that, I'm in. Count me. Yeah. Can I go back to trading baseball cards? If I can do that, I'm in,
Right. But and believe me, I hear you on the whole doubting any of it being legit, but that's what stinks about this, because the Astros, and look, I don't think every individual in that organization is condone this or like this or thought it was okay, but clearly anyone who felt that way was outvoted, and they certainly didn't blow the whistle. So yeah, there's culpability there, but it just, what's frustrating to me is there are lots of great ideas that they did have, and they ruined all that. And that's where, even if Mike Elias and Sig Mejdal are innocent in that way, they still are attached to that. And that's where, as an Orioles fan, I think you look at this whole thing and say, well, I still feel good about the direction of the team, and the farm system has gotten better, and they're using technology, and they're developing better, and they have a presence in the international market that they didn't have really ever. So I still feel good about those things. But what if this is not truly what it was billed to be at the start? And that's where you do look at this and say, well, if the Houston Astros, if they didn't steal signs, what would they have been? I don't think they were a last-place team by any stretch, but you do look at it and say it's forever tainted, in the same way that we talk about Barry Bonds. Now, from whether you believe he should be in the Hall of Fame or not, you look at those numbers and the fact that he eclipsed Hank Aaron for the all-time home run record, and you can fully acknowledge that Barry Bonds was a complete, absolute, no doubt, first-ballot Hall of Famer long before he ever took PEDs, but he took them, and that still disgraces what should have been a career that should have been celebrated. And that's kind of the situation that the Astros find themselves in now. Even if they were brilliant and they did have talented players, and they do. I don't think these players are crappy players without stealing signs, but why did you feel the need to have to do that? And you just ruined it. And now everyone simply views you as a cheater, and your World Series is tainted, and people feel it should be stripped, and everything that you'll do from this day on is going to come under siege. It's going to come under doubt. Even if the Astros win the World Series again at some point in the next couple of years, and even if they do it completely on the up and up, people are still going to doubt that it's on the up and up, and that's where you have a major problem, and that's where, by association at best and at worst, something comes out that implicates Elias or Sig Mejdal. That's where you do look at it from an Orioles perspective and say, is this really what it was billed to be? And I think it's fair to say critics are going to say no, and it's hard to argue with that at this point in time. But to this point, with multiple reports and multiple accounts out there, Mike Elias and Sig Mejdal have not been named specifically. Will that continue? Who knows? But in the meantime, there's kind of the sense of waiting, and I think even a little bit of holding your breath if you're someone that strictly cares about the well-being of the Orioles, the franchise, and baseball operations moving forward.
Here's Luke Jones. He is Baltimore. Luke, dude, at some point we'll talk about the team, okay? And we can talk about Tony Fernandez and like all of that. But, and I don't want to say this is too juicy, but I almost like, me, I don't think about baseball a whole lot, certainly not in February. I'm really, really concerned about all of it, just on a global, where the team is, where the sport is, trying to play games in Montreal, this guy who's leading the sport who's not doing a very good job. And I think as we find with this country, as we find with this city, as we find with the Cleveland Browns, as we have found with Peter Angelos, bad leadership, it's a death knell, dude. And I'm really, really concerned from that aspect. Bad leadership.
Yeah, although we would have said the same thing about Roger Goodell 5 or 6 years ago, and did the NFL really face any penalty from that? And look, MLB is not the NFL, but at the same time, there's a lot of attention on this right now, as there should be. And there should be a lot of ticked-off fans and other teams and other players, and that's something they're going to deal with. And, there's going to be some... at this point, you'd almost be surprised if there aren't some beanball-type incidents. And I'm not saying that that's okay, because it's not, in my opinion. But when you have poor leadership and you don't handle a situation well, there's fallout from that. And I don't think it's the death knell for Major League Baseball, but I think it's something that is a major concern. It's a major problem, and I don't think the answer is, we're going to add 2 more playoff teams and allow teams to pick their opponent for the divisional round. To me, that's the whole holding up a shiny toy and hoping that it distracts people from your problems. And, I think there are other problems in baseball to address other than expanding the playoff field. How about in-market streaming? How about that? We've been talking about that for years.
How about if you just want to watch the games? It's just what if you just care, right?
How about people who want to actually spend money to watch the games but don't want to be raked over the coals by a satellite or cable company, and they want to pay still a good rate, but a more reasonable rate to watch it via streaming? How about that as a problem more so than let's change the rules and let's have 2 more teams in the playoffs and let's have a 3-batter minimum for relief pitchers? I think, and this is something I would have said about Rob Manfred long before the Astros stuff came to light, is baseball, I feel like they're hell-bent on fixing things that aren't broken. Meanwhile, things that are broken, they continue to go by the wayside, or they have no long-term vision whatsoever in how they're approaching.
Well, which worries me for the future of the Orioles, right? Because they would say, the owners will never allow this to happen. Dude, they allowed the World Series to get stolen, and a friggin' commissioner sat over the weekend and called it a piece of metal. It's outrageous. It's outrageous.
Well, and I'll say that, like, I'm glad you brought that up because it's a point I wanted to make. I'm not someone that's in favor of vacating.
Nor am I, but I'm not in favor of the commissioner calling it a piece of metal.
Well, I agree with that. Now, what I will say is perhaps a more meaningful aspect to the punishment that could have been used is why not just finding them $5 million and taking away their first and second round picks the next 2 years. Why not have a 2-year postseason ban for the Astros? Why not? You know, I mean, there's a case of, okay, you stole a World Series, you got one over on us a couple years ago, but guess what? You're not even going to have a chance to do it the next 2 years, even if you're doing it on the up and up. And to me, that I'll hear something like that more so than trying to rewrite the history. Because what are you going to do? Okay, you vacate. What are you going to give the World Series trophy to the Dodgers? Are they going to have a parade 2.5 years later? I mean, come on. I mean, so I definitely am absolutely supportive of more legitimate discipline, more serious discipline, and certainly the idea that players are getting off scot-free or a joke, and the fact that Rob Manfred had the gall to actually say that these players, you look at their faces and what they're going through. I mean, come on, man, that's a joke. To try to say that they haven't gone unpunished is just a joke. And, I mean, the court of public opinion is still all that is, public opinion, compared to an actual punishment with teeth. So
I keep going back to the fact that Rafael Palmeiro got to keep all of his money. Barry Bonds got to keep all of his. They've all kept the money. They've all kept the trophies. They've all kept the awards. They've kept a handful of these guys from getting a plaque up in Cooperstown, but they still get $200 and they go out and sign baseballs. They still have $300 million in the bank. I mean, I don't know where the punishment is when it's shame, shame, shame on you, right? Other than if you're Len Dykstra, right?
And that's where I'm glad you brought up previous eras. I don't want to say this too shall pass because it makes it sound like it's not a big deal, because it is a big deal. But at the same time, the game will move on, and that's where it's kind of where you say at this point, you hope baseball and the Players Union gets this right in terms of preventing this kind of stuff from happening again, certainly. And you hope in the meantime, let's try to fix some other issues in the game that actually need fixing, not having some wonky playoff format that no one asked for. How about let's address some real problems in the game that are there? How about fixing the economic system to the point where you don't have veteran free agents not able to get jobs, and let's reform things, and that's where the Players Union has to step up just as much, if not more, than Major League Baseball, because Rob Manfred's not going to be looking for those things to change because he's working for the owners.
Well, I mean, leaders have to lead, and this is the time where crisis management takes over, and integrity should be at the front, and calling the championship a piece of metal is just outrageous. I mean, it's just outrageous.
Well, and I mean, look, Rob Manfred has a long history, from a legal standpoint and labor and things of that nature, but just because he had that kind of track record on paper that suggested he would be a fine choice to be commissioner doesn't mean it's always going to play out that way. And I think this is just the latest example. And I don't even want to say example. I mean, this is going to be the damning biggest. You hope the biggest black mark on his legacy. You hope there's nothing worse than this, but it just really does speak to a lack of leadership and certainly a situation that was botched, and now baseball is going to deal with the fallout, and probably a big part of it is they're going to have beanball issues on their hands throughout the season, and that's not good either. That's not an okay way of handling it, but when the commissioner and Major League Baseball doesn't police it, well, we always hear about players policing themselves, and I'm afraid we're going to see some of that going forward here in 2020, and who knows how long after that.
Vigilante baseball. We all tune in for the fights, right? He is Luke Jones. You can find him. Those are fighting words. Out of Camden Yards, he'll be there all spring, all summer. 99 losses, 102, 104, 100. Who knows how many? Does it really matter? Baseball around the corner. Woohoo! We're all excited. Nasty at WNST.net finds me. Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, streaming live on everywhere in the world. Out in the buy at Toyota.com. Audio Vault, our YouTube, WNSTV channel. We're easy to find around here, talking about your top 10 Turtles, as well as Orioles spring training, and, of course, all things Ravens as we get up on the Combine, the draft, free agency, and all that good stuff. Baltimore Positive alive and well this week with Mary Miller, Mary Washington, who will be our next mayor. That's what Baltimore Positive's all about. I implore you to reach out, listen up, tune in, focus on the issues, think about the issues, and make sure for everywhere you are, whether you're in the city or not, register to vote, be a part of the democratic process. As I always say to Don Moeller, democracy, not a spectator sport. I am Nestor. We are WNST.net, AM 1570 at WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Oriole baseball.